Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the English Talk community. I'm Julia, and I'm really glad you're here. Whether you're on your way to work, relaxing at home, or just taking a short walk, thank you for choosing to spend this time with me. Today, I want to talk about something that seems small but can make a huge difference in how natural and confident you sound in English. Question intonation. Let me ask you something. Have you ever said a sentence in English and noticed that the person listening to you seemed confused? Or maybe they responded in a way that didn't match what you were trying to say. Maybe you said something like, "You're coming?" But they looked unsure. And you thought, wait, I used the right words. So what went wrong? That's what we're going to explore together today. Here's something a lot of learners don't realize. Even if your grammar is perfect and your vocabulary is strong, your message might still not come across clearly if your intonation doesn't match what you're trying to say. That's especially true when you're asking questions. And I know this from my own experience. When I was learning another language a few years ago, I remember feeling proud of memorizing all the words I needed. But then I asked someone a question, and they looked at me like I was making a statement. It was a strange feeling. I knew I had said the right words. But the melody of my voice, the rise and fall, wasn't quite right. That's when I understood that communication is more than just words. It's also about how you say them. This podcast is all about helping you sound more fluent and natural in English, not by making you perfect, but by helping you connect better. And today's topic, question intonation, is a powerful tool for that. If you're like many learners I've worked with, maybe you've memorized the typical question formats. You know how to ask, "Do you like coffee?" Or, "Where do you live?" But here's the thing. Even if you get the grammar right, if your voice doesn't rise at the end of "Do you like coffee?" it might not sound like a question. And that tiny detail can change how people understand you. You might be using all the right words, but if your question sounds flat or strange, people might get confused or even think you're being rude. Let's fix that today. This is a great opportunity to adjust something small that has a big impact. I want to invite you to really pay attention to this skill in your daily life. Because once you start noticing how native speakers use question intonation, you'll hear it everywhere. In movies, in interviews, in podcasts like this one, you'll hear how their voice rises at the end of yes/no questions and how it falls at the end of which questions. You'll hear how curiosity or doubt or surprise can be heard even before the words are fully said. And when you start to copy that pattern, your English will begin to feel more alive, more natural, and more confident. Now, before we go deeper, if you've ever felt unsure about how your questions sound in English, you're definitely not alone. And that's why we're here, to build your confidence step by step. So if this topic speaks to you, I encourage you to hit the like button and subscribe to the English Talk community. We publish fluency tips every week, and our goal is to help you speak English with more clarity, more confidence, and more connection. It's not about being perfect. It's about being understood and feeling good when you speak. Your future, fluent self will thank you for showing up today. Let me tell you something personal, just to ease the mood a bit before we dive into some real examples. When I started practicing French years ago, I had this one moment at a cafe in Paris that made me laugh later. I walked up to the counter and said what I thought was a question, but the person behind the counter gave me a quick yes and walked away. I stood there, a bit lost, realizing I probably didn't sound like I was asking anything at all. And I get it now. I had said all the right words, but my voice was completely flat. I sounded like I was making a weird statement. That moment stayed with me. It was humbling, but it also reminded me that language isn't just logic, it's rhythm, it's tone, it's music. And English has its own kind of music. It's not always predictable, but there are patterns we can learn. And once we do, we can start to feel those little shifts that turn a phrase into a question, or a question into a real conversation. Think about it. When someone asks, "Are you okay?" With a rising tone at the end, it sounds like real concern. But if someone says, "Are you okay?" with no change in tone, it might sound sarcastic or even cold. The words are identical, but the message is completely different. That's the power of intonation. I also want you to know that it's totally normal to struggle with this at first. It's not something we're usually taught directly in language classes. Many textbooks don't even mention it, or they include a tiny note at the bottom of a page saying, "The voice usually rises in yes/no questions." That's not enough. We need real-life examples, repetition, and conscious practice to make this part of how we speak. Let me ask you to do something simple right now. Just say this sentence out loud. Do you like music? Say it once with a rising tone at the end as if you're really curious. Then say it again with a flat tone, as if you're just repeating something. Can you hear the difference? More importantly, can you feel the difference? That's where the magic happens. Once you feel it, you're already halfway there. Some of my students have told me that they were afraid to use intonation because they didn't want to sound silly. But the truth is, not using it makes your English sound much less natural. So don't hold back. You're allowed to raise your voice at the end of a question. In fact, you should. It's how you let the other person know that you're asking, not telling. And believe me, it helps them understand you faster and more clearly. When I work with students from cities like Madrid, Seoul, Cairo, or Istanbul, I often see the same hesitation. They speak clearly, they have great vocabulary, but their voice stays at the same level throughout the sentence. Once we start working on intonation, everything changes. Their speech sounds more engaging. People respond better to them, and they feel more like themselves in English. So as we go through this topic, I want you to listen closely, not just to my words, but to how I say them. Notice where my voice rises and where it falls. Try to mimic it. Play it back. Practice it. Because the more you play with this, the more it becomes natural. And once it becomes natural, you'll wonder how you ever spoke without it. Let's get into the heart of it. But remember, it's not about perfection, it's about connection. That's what English is for. That's what communication is for. And you're doing a great job just by being here, learning and growing. Let's keep going. Let's take a moment to explore what question intonation actually is, because understanding this one skill can completely shift how others perceive your English. When people hear the term intonation, they often imagine something technical or complicated, but really it's something you use every day, even in your native language. Intonation is simply the rise and fall of your voice as you speak. It's the musical quality in speech that adds feeling, emotion, and meaning. And when it comes to asking questions in English, intonation can be even more important than the words you're using. Let me say that again. You could be using the correct words and correct grammar, but if your intonation doesn't match what you're trying to express, people may misunderstand you. I've seen this happen with so many learners, and honestly, I've experienced it myself when speaking other languages. It's frustrating when you say something like, "You're coming?" and the other person thinks you're not asking. They think you're making a statement. That's the power of intonation. It's invisible, but it completely changes what people hear and how they respond. Let me break it down in a really simple way. There are generally two types of question intonation patterns in English. The first is rising intonation, and the second is falling intonation. These are not grammar rules, they're patterns of sound. But these patterns are powerful because they help your listener understand the intention behind your question. Let's look at rising intonation first. This is what you'll hear in most yes/no questions. For example, "Are you ready?" or "Do you like pizza?" In both of these cases, your voice naturally rises toward the end of the sentence. You're not making a statement. You're opening a space for the other person to respond. That rise in your voice is what tells them, "I'm waiting for an answer." Now let's look at falling intonation. This usually happens in information questions that start with who, what, where, when, why, or how. For example, "What time is it?" or "Where are you going?" In these cases, your voice usually falls at the end. You're still asking a question, but the tone is more neutral, more stable. You're not asking for a yes or no, you're asking for information, so the voice naturally falls. But I've worked with students from places like Warsaw, Jakarta, and São Paulo, and I've seen this happen again and again. One of my students from Berlin used to ask, "You like it?" but with a completely flat tone. Sometimes listeners didn't respond at all, or they looked a little confused. When she added that gentle rising intonation at the end, "You like it?" People immediately understood her question. Just that small change made a big difference. And it's not just about understanding. It's also about emotion. Intonation shows whether you're excited, surprised, doubtful, or even annoyed. Think about the difference between really and really. The first one, rising tone, shows surprise or interest. The second one, flat or falling tone, might sound sarcastic or bored. You're using the same word, but with a different feeling. That's what intonation does. So why does this matter so much for your fluency? Because when people speak to you, they don't only listen to your words, they listen to how those words are delivered. If your intonation doesn't match your message, people might feel something is off. They might ask you to repeat, or they might respond in a way that surprises you. And you're left wondering what went wrong. But once you learn how to use intonation correctly, you unlock a whole new level of communication. You stop sounding robotic, you sound human, and people connect with you more easily. Another student of mine, originally from Mumbai, shared a great story with me. He had just moved to London for work and was feeling nervous about speaking English with his coworkers. He told me, "Julia, I know how to ask questions, but I feel like people don't take me seriously, or they misunderstand me." We practiced a few basic questions, focusing only on his intonation. And right away, there was a shift. His voice became more dynamic, more expressive. A week later, he told me, "People are responding to me better. They're smiling more. They're opening up." And all we did was tweak the music of his voice. Here's the truth. When your intonation is off, your English might sound unnatural, even if everything else is right. That's why sometimes your sentence might be grammatically perfect, but people still don't get what you're saying. They feel something is missing, even if they don't know what it is. And that something is usually intonation. Let's go back to the basics. You might be wondering, how do I know if I'm using the right intonation? A good place to start is to listen more carefully when native speakers ask questions. Watch how their voice moves. Does it rise? Does it fall? Is there a pause? Does their tone sound curious, firm, or relaxed? Start noticing these things in real conversations, in TV shows, and even in songs. Then, try to copy what you hear. Don't just repeat the words, repeat the sound pattern. And here's a tip. Record yourself. Take a simple question like, "Are you busy?" and record yourself saying it with rising and falling intonation. Then, play it back and compare. Ask yourself, which one actually sounds like a question? You'll be surprised how much you can learn by just listening to yourself. I want to remind you that you don't need to get this perfect. No one expects you to sound like a news anchor or an actor in a movie. The goal is to make your speech clearer and more natural. Even small changes in your voice can make a big difference in how people understand you and how confident you feel when you speak. Some learners worry that using intonation will make them sound dramatic or fake. But in English, it's completely normal. In fact, if your voice stays the same all the time, that's when it sounds unnatural. Think about how you speak in your own language. Your voice goes up and down all the time without you even thinking about it. The same thing needs to happen in English. It's not about acting. It's about expressing yourself in a way that feels real. Let me leave you with this thought. If you've been focusing only on grammar and vocabulary, that's great. You've built a strong foundation. But now it's time to add that final layer, the music of your voice. That's what brings your English to life. And it starts with something as simple as how you ask a question. When your intonation matches your intention, your English becomes not just correct, but powerful. When we talk about sounding more natural in English, one of the most powerful tools you can master is question intonation. And luckily, you don't need to learn dozens of different patterns to get started. There are really just two core intonation patterns you need to focus on: rising intonation and falling intonation. If you understand how these two work and when to use them, you'll already sound more fluent, more confident, and much easier to understand. Let's start with rising intonation. This happens when your voice goes up at the end of a sentence. It's very common in yes/no questions. For example, if I say, "Are you ready?" and my voice rises at the end, you immediately know I'm asking a question that expects a yes or no answer. Try saying that out loud. Are you ready? Can you feel your voice lifting at the end? That rising pitch is what signals that you're asking, not telling. Without even changing the words, that rise transforms your sentence into a question. Now imagine saying the same words but with a flat or falling voice. Are you ready? It doesn't feel like a real question anymore. It might even sound like you're making a statement or assuming the other person is already ready. That's how sensitive English is to tone. Just a small change in the rise or fall of your voice can shift how your message is understood. Here's another example. Do you want some coffee? That rising sound at the end invites a yes or no answer. If I said it with a falling tone, do you want some coffee? It might sound like, I'm not really asking. I could be annoyed, impatient, or simply making a comment. This can lead to confusion, especially when you're trying to be polite or friendly. In English, the rising tone adds that sense of openness. It shows curiosity or interest, and it gives the listener room to respond. On the other side, we have falling intonation. This is when your voice goes down at the end of a sentence. It's the most common pattern used in WH questions, questions that begin with who, what, where, when, why, or how. For example, what time is it? Or where are you going? Try saying those out loud and notice the way your voice naturally drops at the end. That falling tone signals that you're asking for specific information, not just a yes or no. Let's look at a few more examples. Why are you late? How did you do that? When is the meeting? All of these have falling intonation. Your voice comes down slightly at the end, giving the sentence a clear, complete feeling. In these cases, you're not just checking if something is true, you're actively looking for details. The falling tone helps your listener know you're serious about getting an answer. I want to give you a helpful way to remember this. Think of rising intonation as a kind of open door. It's inviting, uncertain, curious. You're waiting for someone to walk through it with an answer. Think of falling intonation as a closing door. It's more final, more firm, and it signals that you've asked your question and are now waiting for a response. Both are equally important. One is not better than the other. It just depends on the kind of question you're asking. Let me tell you about a student I worked with last year. Her name was Sophia, and she was from Barcelona. She had a solid understanding of grammar and vocabulary, but she often struggled to make her questions sound natural. In our first session, she asked me, "You like tea?" but with no rising tone at the end. It sounded like a flat statement, not a question. I asked her to repeat the same sentence but let her voice rise at the end. "You like tea?" Instantly, it sounded clear and friendly. That little change made a big difference. Over the next few weeks, we practiced rising and falling patterns with simple sentences, and she told me later that even native speakers at her office had started responding more naturally to her. Another student, Kenji from Tokyo, used to ask which questions with rising intonation. "Where are you going?" with a rising tone. While that's not always wrong, it often made his questions sound like he was unsure or nervous. We practiced keeping the tone down at the end, "Where are you going?" And that gave his voice more authority. It made him sound more confident and calm. That's the kind of impact intonation can have. So how do you practice these patterns on your own? One way is to choose simple yes, no questions and which questions and repeat them out loud, focusing only on the way your voice moves. Say, "Are you tired?" and feel the rise. I also encourage you to create a list of personal questions you might use in daily conversation. For example, do you like music? Are you coming to the party? What kind of movies do you enjoy? Practice each one with the right tone. Use a rising intonation for yes, no questions, and falling intonation for which questions. Even 10 minutes a day can help your intonation feel more automatic. Some learners worry that practicing intonation will make them sound exaggerated or unnatural. But actually, the opposite is true. When your intonation is flat, that's when you sound robotic. Rising and falling tones are what make English feel alive. They add emotion and energy, and that's what helps you connect with people, not just communicate words. Think about how you speak your native language. You don't speak every sentence in the same tone, right? You naturally rise and fall as you express curiosity, surprise, joy, or confusion. English works the same way. By focusing on these two main patterns, rising for yes, no, falling for wage questions, you're training your ear and your mouth to work in sync. And the more you practice, the more these patterns become a part of your natural rhythm. Intonation isn't just about pronunciation. It's about meaning. It's about communication. And once you're aware of these two simple patterns, you'll find that you can express yourself much more clearly in conversations. You'll stop relying so much on textbook phrases and start sounding like someone who really feels what they're saying. And I want to remind you, this is something you can start using today. No need to wait until your grammar is perfect or until you memorize more vocabulary. Rising and falling intonation are tools you already have in your voice. You just need to notice them, practice them, and use them with intention. Once you do, your English will not only sound better, it will feel better too. When Maya first moved from Berlin to London, she felt prepared. She had studied English for years, taken classes, passed exams, and even worked with international clients in her previous job. So when she accepted a new position as a designer at a creative agency in Central London, she was excited, confident. Her vocabulary was strong, her grammar reliable. She knew she could express herself, or at least she thought she could. The first few weeks went well. Maya got along with her team. She was delivering high-quality work and meeting deadlines. But something felt off. In meetings, her suggestions were often met with awkward silences. Her requests sometimes seemed to put people on edge. One day, her manager asked to speak with her privately and gave her feedback that surprised her. He said, "Sometimes the way you ask things sounds a bit too direct. People feel like you're upset or annoyed even when you're not." Maya was shocked. She wasn't trying to be rude, far from it. In fact, she was trying hard to sound clear and efficient, but the message wasn't landing the way she intended. She started to replay conversations in her mind. Simple moments stood out. She remembered saying to a colleague, "Can you send me that file?" and watching their smile disappear, or asking, "Are you done with the presentation?" and noticing a sudden coldness in their response. These were not meant to be harsh questions, but something in the delivery was causing confusion. That's when she started paying attention to intonation. At first, Maya didn't understand what the issue was. Her grammar was fine. Her choice of words was polite. So she asked a British colleague she trusted, someone who had grown up in Manchester, for some honest feedback. They sat down for coffee, and Maya asked, "Do I sound rude when I speak?" Her colleague smiled gently and said, "Sometimes yes, but not because of what you say. It's how you say it." They started going over some examples. Maya would repeat a few of the questions she had used in meetings, and her colleague would point out the tone. One by one, Maya realized she had been using flat or falling intonation in almost all her questions, including yes-no questions, that typically use rising intonation in English. She had been saying, "Can you send me that file?" with a tone that sounded final, firm, maybe even demanding. But when her colleague said it with a slight rise at the end, "Can you send me that file?" it suddenly felt lighter, more polite, more like a genuine request. They went through a few more examples. "Are you free this afternoon?" With a flat tone, it sounded like a statement, almost like a schedule being imposed. But with rising intonation, "Are you free this afternoon?" the question became friendly, open, flexible. That small lift at the end changed everything. Maya was fascinated. No one had ever taught her this. In school, she had focused on grammar rules, vocabulary lists, reading comprehension, and test scores. But no one had ever said, "Hey, if you want to sound friendly and professional in English, your voice needs to rise when you ask a yes-no question." It was a completely new layer of communication that had been invisible to her until now. She decided to make it a part of her daily practice. Each morning before work, she picked 5 questions she might need that day and practiced saying them aloud, with correct intonation. Can I ask you something? Do you have a minute? Are we meeting at 10? Is this the final version? Should I upload the design? She practiced each one slowly, making sure her voice rose naturally at the end. Not exaggerated, just enough to show the other person that it was a question, and that she was being open and respectful. Within a week, she started to notice a change. Her coworkers responded to her more warmly. Conversations flowed more easily. People said sure and of course more often. That invisible tension that had been following her around started to disappear. Even her manager mentioned the difference. During a team meeting, he told her, "Your communication has become really smooth lately. It's great to see." Maya didn't explain all the work she'd been doing on intonation. She just smiled and said thank you. But inside, she felt proud. It wasn't just about improving her English. It was about learning to connect with people better. The most powerful moment came during a client call. Maya had to ask the client to resend some files. In the past, she might have said, "Can you send the files again?" with a voice that could have sounded cold or annoyed. But now she said, "Could you send the files again?" with a gentle rise at the end. The client responded with a cheerful, "No problem at all." And that small success gave her the confidence to keep going. Maya's story is one I think about often because it shows how small details can create big changes. Her vocabulary didn't change. Her grammar didn't change. She didn't suddenly become more fluent overnight. What changed was her awareness of how English works in real life, how the tone of your voice carries meaning that words alone can't convey. And this is true not just in the workplace. It applies in social situations too. Maya told me that once she started adjusting her intonation, even small talk felt easier. Asking, "Are you from around here?" at an event, or "Do you want to grab lunch?" with a colleague became opportunities to connect instead of awkward moments. She realized that native speakers weren't just listening to her words, they were listening to the way she asked them. So often, learners feel stuck because they believe their English isn't advanced enough. But Maya is proof that fluency isn't always about adding more words. Sometimes it's about using the words you already know with the right intonation. That's what makes people want to engage with you. That's what builds confidence. And once she made that shift, her experience in London became something totally different. Not just a job in another country, but a place where she could really be herself. I think there's a powerful lesson here. Sometimes the thing that makes the biggest difference in how others respond to you isn't your vocabulary or accent. It's the music in your voice. That rise that shows you're inviting someone in. That subtle fall that tells them you're serious. And once you start hearing it and using it, everything about your English communication begins to feel more real, more human, and more you. One of the simplest and most effective ways to improve your question intonation, especially for yes/no questions, is something I like to call the sing-song trick. It might sound a bit silly at first, but stay with me because this technique has helped so many of my students around the world. Whether you're from Madrid or Seoul, São Paulo, or Istanbul, you can use this strategy starting today. And you don't need anything fancy, just your voice and a few minutes of focused attention. Let's begin by understanding what I mean by sing-song. Let me show you what this sounds like with a few everyday examples. Take the sentence, "Do you want coffee?" If you say it with a flat tone, "Do you want coffee?" it sounds like you're making a statement or maybe giving an order. But if you let your voice rise slightly at the end, "Do you want coffee?" it suddenly becomes an inviting, friendly question. That little sing-song quality makes all the difference. Let's try another one. "Is it raining?" Try saying it out loud, first in a flat tone. Then again, lifting your voice softly at the end, like a gentle tune. "Is it raining?" You'll notice right away that the second version sounds more natural, more like how native speakers talk. You don't need to overdo it. The goal is not to sound musical, but to introduce just enough melody so your listener knows you're asking a question. I often tell my students, don't be afraid to play with your voice. Learning English isn't just about words, it's about rhythm, sound, and feeling. Intonation is what makes your speech come alive. Without it, even correct sentences can sound robotic or confusing. Here's how you can start practicing the sing-song trick. Choose 5 yes-no questions you might use in your daily life. Write them down. For example, do you like it? Are you hungry? Is he at home? Should we go now? Can I help you? Now, say each one out loud, slowly. As you reach the final word or syllable, let your voice rise just a little, as if you were singing a soft note. It doesn't have to be dramatic, just enough to sound natural and curious. Repeat each question 3 or 4 times. Focus on how it feels. You might notice your mouth and throat adjusting slightly. That's great. It means your body is learning how to shape the sound. To help train your ear, you can also record yourself. Use your phone or computer. Say each question first with a flat tone, then with rising intonation. Listen back and compare. You'll start to notice what sounds more natural, and you'll become more aware of how intonation changes the emotional tone of a sentence. I remember a student from Bangkok who used to ask questions like, "Can you check this for me?" And people would hesitate before responding. Once she started using the sing-song trick, the reaction was completely different. The same words, now with a friendly rise at the end, "Can you check this for me?" made her sound open and approachable. She even told me that her colleagues began smiling more often during conversations. That's the power of good intonation. You can even practice with short dialogues. For example, imagine this exchange. A. Do you want to join us for lunch? B. Yes, I'd love to. Then flip roles and try both sides. Let the question rise at the end, and keep the tone friendly and light. This kind of role play, even when you do it alone, helps build muscle memory. Over time, your brain starts to recognize the melody of questions, and it becomes automatic. If you're feeling unsure or self-conscious, don't worry. This is totally normal. Intonation isn't something we're usually taught in school, so it takes a bit of practice. But just like learning a new song, the more you repeat it, the more natural it feels. I often remind my listeners, it's not about sounding perfect. It's about being understood and making others feel comfortable. Another way to practice is by shadowing native speakers. Find short clips from interviews, podcasts, or TV shows where people are asking questions. Listen closely and repeat what they say, mimicking their rhythm and tone. You'll start to hear patterns. How the voice rises when it pauses, how it softens or emphasizes certain words. All of these details add richness to your speaking skills. One student from Paris told me she practiced this every morning while brushing her teeth. She would look in the mirror and say things like, "Are you ready for work?" or "Is the meeting at 10?" using the sing-song intonation. It became a fun daily ritual, and it made a real difference in her confidence. So my tip for you today is simple, but powerful. Use the sing-song trick to bring life to your yes/no questions. Think of it as giving your voice a bit of a friendly smile. It's a small change that creates a big impact. You'll sound more natural, more polite, and more like yourself in English. And the best part? You already have everything you need to do it. Just your voice, your curiosity, and a little practice every day. Let's do something together that's really going to help train your ears and your brain to hear and understand question intonation better. This kind of focused listening practice is one of the best ways to build awareness and confidence. And don't worry, we're going to keep it light, just like if we were sitting together in a classroom or chatting over coffee. I want you to imagine I'm going to say the same question in 2 different ways. Your job is to listen closely and ask yourself, which one sounds more natural? Which one actually sounds like a real question? It's okay if you're not sure at first. That's exactly the kind of noticing we're here to develop. Think of it as tuning your ears to the music of English. Let's try the first example. I'll say it in a flat tone. Are you coming with us? Now. I'll say it again, but this time with a rising intonation at the end, like a question. Are you coming with us? Can you hear the difference? The first one feels more like a statement. It sounds like someone is just giving you information. But the second one clearly feels like a question. It has curiosity in it, it invites an answer. The only difference between them is the tone, the intonation. But that tiny difference has a big impact. Let's break it down. When I use a flat, Tone, are you coming with us? There's no real emotional cue. It can even feel a little cold or robotic. But when my voice rises, are you coming with us? It becomes warmer and more natural. That rising melody is a signal to the listener. I'm asking you something. Please respond. Let's try another one. First, in a flat tone. Did you see the message? And now with rising intonation. Did you see the message? Which one feels more like a real question? Most people can hear it once they slow down and really listen. That's the key here. You don't need to rush. Practicing your listening is just as important as practicing your speaking. In fact, many of the improvements in speaking come directly from sharper listening. When I work with students, I often see this moment of realization. This moment when they finally hear what they've been missing. It's like suddenly hearing a note in a song that they'd never noticed before. Once you hear it, you can't unhear it. And that's when your pronunciation and fluency really start to grow. Now let's go a step further. This time I'll give you two versions again, and I want you to actually speak your answer out loud. Say, first one or second one after you listen. Ready? Here's the first version. Can we start now? Here's the second version. Can we start now? Which one sounds more polite? Which one sounds like you're really checking if the other person is ready? Say it out loud. First one or second one. Great. Most learners say the second one feels more natural. That's because of the rising tone at the end. It makes it sound like you're genuinely asking, not demanding or assuming. Let's try another set. First, is this your bag? Second, is this your bag? Say it out loud. First or second? Which one sounds more like a question? You can repeat this kind of practice on your own too. Try recording yourself saying both versions and playing them back. Or ask a friend to read one version and you guess if they're using the rising question tone or not. It becomes like a game, and the more you play, the better your ear gets. Once worked with a learner named Luis from Mexico City. He was already pretty fluent, but people often misunderstood him, not because of his vocabulary or grammar, but because of how flat his questions sounded. During meetings, he would ask things like, "Do you agree with that?" And it would sound more like a statement than a question. People weren't sure if he was really asking or just expressing his opinion. When he started practicing with this kind of listening, spotting the difference between rising and flat intonation, things started to click, and once he could hear it, he could imitate it. He told me it felt like finding the missing piece of a puzzle. Here's one more pair for you to test yourself with. First version, have you finished the report? Second version, have you finished the report? Which one do you think would make your coworker more likely to respond? Say it out loud, first or second. This kind of focused, simple practice is incredibly powerful, and you don't need hours of study to improve. Just listening to 5 or 10 examples like this every day will gradually tune your ear. You'll start hearing these patterns in conversations, in movies, in podcasts. You'll begin to recognize not just the words people say, but the feeling behind their words. And that's exactly how native speakers communicate, through meaning, emotion, and rhythm, not just vocabulary. So my suggestion is this: make listening to intonation part of your daily practice. Even while you're doing something else, cooking, walking, commuting, take a few moments to listen actively. Choose short phrases and pay attention to how they rise and fall. Ask yourself, what emotion is this question carrying? Does it feel like a real question? Over time, your brain will start to copy. Let me tell you about someone who completely changed the way people responded to him, just by adjusting how he sounded when asking questions. His name is Raj, and he lives in Mumbai. Raj worked in customer service for a global tech company, helping clients from all over the world solve their issues by phone and email. His English was solid. He had studied for years, knew all the right vocabulary, and could handle complex customer issues without hesitation. But something was still off. At first, Raj couldn't figure it out. He kept getting feedback from his manager saying, "Try to sound friendlier," or "Be more patient on the phone." That was confusing for Raj because in his mind, he was being helpful. He was using polite language. He wasn't saying anything wrong. But the tone of his voice, especially when asking questions, was giving customers the wrong impression. One day, a colleague pulled him aside after a call and said, "Raj, you're saying everything perfectly, but you don't sound like you're asking. You sound like you're stating things, and sometimes it comes across as irritated, even if you're just trying to be clear." That moment stuck with Raj. It was uncomfortable to hear, but it opened his eyes to something he had never considered before. It wasn't what he was saying that mattered most. It was how he was saying it. He began to reflect on his calls. For example, after resolving an issue, he would often say, "Can I help you with anything else?" But he said it with a falling or flat tone. No rise at the end. And to a native speaker's ears, that sounded more like a closing statement, almost like he was rushing to end the conversation. Sometimes it even sounded a little annoyed, even though Raj wasn't annoyed at all. He was just being efficient. But that efficiency was hurting the feeling of the interaction. Raj started paying attention to the tone of native English speakers in customer service roles. He listened to call recordings, watched training videos, and noticed something powerful. The rise in their voice at the end of questions. A gentle lift. A sing-song kind of rhythm. "Can I help you with anything else?" With a warm upward tone, almost like they were smiling through the words. It made the question sound open, inviting, and genuine. He practiced at home. Every day before work, he would stand in front of a mirror and repeat questions out loud with different intonations. "Is there anything else I can help you with? Would you like me to explain that again? Are you happy with the solution?" He recorded himself, compared it with examples online, and even asked his sister to listen and give feedback. Slowly, something shifted. One day, during a call with a client from Toronto, Raj helped solve a small technical issue. At the end, he asked with a natural rising tone, "Is there anything else I can help you with?" The client paused for a second and said, "You know, you're really helpful and your tone is so friendly. Thank you." That small compliment meant a lot. It was the first time someone had commented not on the information Raj gave, but on how he made them feel. That wasn't a one-time thing. As he kept practicing, Raj began to notice more positive reactions from customers. They were more relaxed, more conversational, more open. They stayed on the line a little longer. They thanked him more sincerely. Even when the solution wasn't perfect, they appreciated the tone of care and support. His manager noticed too, and in his next performance review, Raj was praised for showing great improvement in empathy and customer engagement. It's amazing how much power a small rise in your voice can carry. It can transform a mechanical sentence into a human connection. Raj learned that fluency isn't just about having the right words. It's about the rhythm, the flow, the music of English. He still says the same questions. The only thing that changed is the intonation, but that changed everything. One of his favorite phrases to practice became, "Would you like me to explain that another way?" At first, it sounded like he was frustrated. But with practice, letting the voice rise gently at the end, it started to sound caring, thoughtful, and open. He used it often, and it became a signature part of his calls. Raj also shared a great tip. He told me that before every shift, he would warm up his voice with 5 common customer service questions, always focusing on intonation. Just 5. "Can I help you with something? Is this your first time calling? Do you need help with anything else? Are you happy with the service? Would you like me to send a summary?" He said it took less than 5 minutes, but it got his voice into the right rhythm for the rest of the day, and that's something anyone can do. Whether you're working in customer service, studying English for travel, or preparing for a job interview, it doesn't take hours of practice. It just takes awareness and a few minutes of focused listening and speaking. You can record your voice, compare it with native speakers, and slowly build that natural, friendly rise at the end of your questions. It feels strange at first. For Raj, it felt almost too soft, too musical, but it worked. Today, Raj is one of the top-rated team members on his support line. He didn't change his vocabulary. He didn't memorize fancy words. He changed the tone of his questions, and that changed how people felt when talking to him. That's the real power of intonation. When you practice this, don't worry about I's. Sounding like someone else. Focus on sounding like you, but with a tone that welcomes, invites, and shows care. That's what fluency is all about. It's not just clear communication, it's human communication. Raj understood that, and now he teaches it to new hires on his team. He always tells them, people remember how you made them feel, not just what you said. Let your tone do the talking. And I couldn't agree more. When I first started teaching English, one of the biggest surprises for me was realizing how many students treated intonation like a grammar rule, something fixed, technical, and emotionless. They would ask me, should my voice go up or down here? As if it were a formula, like using the past tense. And while yes, there are general patterns, like rising for yes, no questions, and falling for wage questions, what truly brings your English to life is something deeper than rules. It's emotion. Intonation is not just about pitch or rhythm. It's how we express curiosity, excitement, confusion, politeness, or even hesitation, without changing the actual words we're saying. That's the real beauty of spoken language. You can say the same sentence 100 different ways depending on how you feel, and people will pick up on it instantly. That's what makes English sound natural. That's what creates connection. Let me give you a simple example. Take the question, really? It's one word, but depending on how you say it, it can mean so many different things. Say it with rising intonation and wide eyes. Really? And it sounds like you're curious or surprised. Say it with a flat voice and narrowed eyes. Really? And it might sound sarcastic or doubtful. Say it with a gentle rise and a soft voice. Really? And it might sound like you're touched or impressed. It's not about the word. It's all about the emotion in your voice. Now think about a question like, are you okay? You can say this with genuine concern or with annoyance or even with joy, depending on the tone. If someone just had a bad day and you say, are you okay? Softly with rising intonation and a slower pace, it shows you care. But if someone is acting strangely and you say, are you okay? With a sharp or exaggerated rise, it could sound like you're criticizing or teasing. These tiny changes make a big difference. So many of my students memorize the words, but their tone doesn't match the situation. They might be asking, do you need help? But the tone is flat or mechanical, and it doesn't feel inviting. Or they might say, can I ask you something? But their voice sounds hesitant, like they're unsure of themselves. I always tell them, don't just say the words, feel them. Think about what emotion you want the listener to receive. Curiosity, helpfulness, confidence, politeness. Here's a fun exercise I use with my students. I ask them to choose one simple question, like, do you want to come with us? And say it in 5 different emotional tones: excited, nervous, suspicious, playful, and bored. It's always interesting to see how their whole body language changes when they really connect with the feeling. Their eyes light up, their voice becomes more expressive, and suddenly, they don't sound like a textbook anymore. They sound like real people. I encourage you to try this at home. Take common everyday questions and imagine different situations where you'd say them. For example, did you see that? Say it like you just saw something amazing. Now say it like you just saw something terrible. Now say it like you're joking with a friend. Are you serious? Try it with genuine shock. Then try it with sarcasm. Then try it with disbelief. Can I help you? Say it like a friendly shop assistant. Now say it like you're annoyed someone is bothering you. Each time, notice how your voice naturally changes. Your pitch rises or falls, your pace slows down or speeds up, your volume gets softer or louder. That's not grammar. That's emotion, and that's what makes you sound fluent. Another trick I use is to imagine the question as part of a short movie scene. Let's say you're saying, is everything okay? Picture the context. Are you a friend checking in on someone? Are you a boss asking an employee? Are you a parent talking to a child? Each of those versions will sound different because your emotional tone changes. This kind of mental visualization helps bring meaning and life to the words, which naturally improves your intonation. One student of mine, Lucia from Argentina, once told me that when she tried this technique, Thinking of a specific emotion before speaking, she suddenly felt more confident. She said she used to feel robotic when speaking English, even though her grammar was perfect. But once she allowed herself to feel the question, her voice became more expressive. People started responding to her more warmly, and conversations became easier and more natural. There's another reason this is important. When you add emotion to your voice, you also make it easier for others to understand you. A monotone voice is harder to follow, especially for native speakers who expect certain patterns in intonation. Emotion helps you emphasize keywords, highlight your questions, and show your intent, even if your accent is strong or your grammar isn't perfect. Emotion fills the gaps. It gives your English a heartbeat. So if you've ever felt like people didn't quite understand you, or that your English sounded too stiff or too formal, try shifting your focus. Don't just worry about getting the words right. Think about how you're saying them. Ask yourself, what am I feeling? What do I want the listener to feel? Then let that guide your tone. That's where real fluency begins. Not with memorization, but with expression. Sounding curious is part of sounding natural. Sounding excited, interested, concerned, or even surprised, those are the colors of real conversation. And they're not something you have to study from a textbook. You already know how to do this in your native language. It's just a matter of bringing that awareness into your English practice. When you listen to native speakers, don't just focus on the words they use. Pay attention to how they use their voice. Notice when their pitch goes up or down, when they pause, when they sound warm, or when they sound doubtful. Try to mimic not just the sentence, but the feeling behind it. Record yourself and compare. You'll be surprised how much more engaging and clear your speech becomes. One final thing I like to remind my students is this. Your voice is a powerful tool. It's not just a way to deliver information, it's a way to create connection. When you speak with feeling, you invite others into the moment with you. And when people feel that emotion, they remember you, not just your words. One of the most common things I notice when I'm listening to English learners speak is the way they ask questions. And no, I'm not talking about grammar or vocabulary. I'm talking about tone, the way your voice moves when you speak. What I often hear is a completely flat tone across every question. It doesn't rise, it doesn't fall, it doesn't shift. It just stays the same. And the result? It sounds robotic. Sometimes even confusing. I say this with love because I know you've worked hard to learn the words. You've memorized the question forms. You've practiced the sentences. But if your voice sounds flat when you ask, "Do you like music?" It doesn't sound like a real question. It might even sound like a statement, or worse, like you're bored or uninterested. And if you keep speaking this way, even if your English is technically correct, people may feel like something is missing. They might not connect with you the way you want. I always tell my students, if you sound like a robot, people might treat you like one. I know that sounds a little harsh, but think about it. When someone speaks in a monotone voice, it's harder to stay interested in what they're saying. We're naturally drawn to voices that have rhythm, movement, and emotion. That's how we know someone is engaged. That's how we recognize curiosity or friendliness. When everything sounds the same, it's like listening to a machine reading a script. It doesn't feel real. Let's try something together. Imagine you're asking someone, "Do you want some coffee?" Now say it out loud in a completely flat voice. No rise, no fall. Just, "Do you want some coffee?" That doesn't sound like a question, right? It sounds like a random line from a textbook or a voice assistant. Now try again, but this time, raise your voice just a little at the end. "Do you want some coffee?" That simple rise tells the listener, "Hey, I'm asking you something, I'm interested in your answer." It's a tiny change, but it transforms how you come across. I remember one of my students, Paulo from Brazil. He spoke with great grammar, had a solid vocabulary, and could understand English really well. But whenever he asked a question, his tone stayed completely flat. So he'd say things like, "Can you help me?" or "Is this your bag?" with no rise, no musicality. People sometimes didn't respond, not because they were being rude, but because they didn't realize he was asking something. After a few sessions focusing just on intonation, especially practicing yes-no questions with a rising tone, he came back and said, "Julia, now people answer me faster. They actually look at me when I ask." That's the power of using your voice, not just your words. Let me give you a few more examples to think about. Take the sentence, is she coming? If you say that with a flat tone, is she coming? It almost sounds like you're not really asking. Maybe you're just repeating something. Now say it with a rise. Is she coming? It's a question now. It sounds alive. Or think about, do you live around here? With a flat tone, it's forgettable. With a rising tone, it becomes friendly, curious, and conversational. What about when questions like, what time is it? Even though this question typically has falling intonation, it still shouldn't be completely flat. A flat tone here can make it sound cold or even annoyed. What time is it? But if you let your voice naturally rise a bit in the middle and fall at the end, what time is it? It sounds normal, like something you'd actually say in a real situation. The voice still moves. It still has energy. One exercise I give my students is to record themselves reading 5 questions in their usual voice. Then I ask them to listen back and identify if their voice is doing anything, rising, falling, expressing emotion, or if it just sounds the same across every sentence. Most of the time, they realize their tone is too flat. The next step is to pick just one of those questions and exaggerate the intonation on purpose. Make the rising tone super obvious. At first, it feels strange or even funny, but once they get used to that feeling, they can dial it back to a natural level. That's how you find your balance. Now, I get it. Sometimes learners are afraid to exaggerate because they don't want to sound silly. But in English, a little bit of melody in your voice is not silly. It's normal. It's expected. And if you're not sure how much is too much, just listen to native speakers. Watch how their voices go up, dip down, pause, and rise again. It's not robotic. It's expressive. That's what gives spoken English its rhythm and charm. Another student of mine, Aiko from Japan, once said, "I feel more confident when I don't move my voice too much. It's safer." I totally understood her. In some cultures, keeping a neutral tone is a sign of politeness or respect. But in English, especially in casual conversations, too much flatness can come across as distant or uninterested. I encouraged her to start small, just lifting her pitch a little on yes-no questions. And over time, her speech began to sound more inviting, more like a conversation than a script. If you've been using the same tone for every question, don't worry. You're not alone. This is one of the most common habits for English learners, especially those who've studied mostly through books or in silent classrooms. But it's also one of the easiest habits to fix, once you become aware of it. All it takes is a little bit of conscious practice. Try this today. Pick 5 yes-no questions and say them with a rising tone at the end. Then pick 5 wait questions and say them with a falling tone, but with natural variation. Don't make them flat. Record yourself. Listen back. Then try again. Each time, let your voice express the meaning of the question. Feel what you're saying, and your voice will follow. This is how you move from sounding like a learner to sounding like a communicator. So the next time you speak, don't just focus on the words. Pay attention to your tone. Ask yourself, am I using the same pitch all the time? Does this sound like a real question or like a line from a robot? Then make one small change. Let your voice rise. Let it fall. Let it move. Because that movement is what brings your English to life. I want to share a story with you about Carla, a student from São Paulo who moved to Toronto for work. Carla was very confident in her English vocabulary and grammar, but she kept running into a communication problem that puzzled her. She would ask questions like, "You like music," but the way she said it, it sounded exactly like a statement. So even though she was trying to find out someone's opinion or start a conversation, the people she spoke with often looked confused or gave answers that didn't match what she was really asking. At first, Carla didn't understand why this was happening. She thought her English was clear because her words were correct. But as we started working together, I explained something very important. Intonation, the rise and fall of your voice, changes the meaning of sentences dramatically, especially questions. For native English speakers, a sentence like, "You like music," said with a flat or falling tone sounds like a statement. It's a simple fact, not a question. When Carla asked, "You like music?" With no rise in tone at the end, people heard it as "you like music," like she was telling them something, not asking them. This created confusion and sometimes awkwardness. Carla told me about one conversation at a cafe where she wanted to know what kind of music a new coworker liked. She asked, "You like music?" The coworker replied, "Yes," but with a questioning look, unsure if Carla was making a statement or actually asking for their opinion. Carla was left feeling a bit frustrated because her goal was to connect and get to know her coworker better, but the conversation didn't flow naturally. I explained to Carla that in English, rising intonation at the end of a yes-no question signals that you're genuinely asking for information. It's like your voice says, "Please tell me." So I showed her how to change her intonation by lifting her voice slightly at the end of the question. Instead of, "You like music." With a flat tone, she practiced, "You like music?" with her voice rising gently at the end. That small change made a big difference. Carla started practicing this in everyday situations, first by herself, then with friends and coworkers. She would repeat questions in front of a mirror or record herself to notice the difference in tone. At first, it felt a little strange to consciously lift her voice like that, but soon it became natural. People started responding more quickly and with more enthusiasm because they knew Carla was really asking a question, not making a statement. One day, Carla told me about a meeting at work where she needed to ask if her team was ready for a presentation. Before, she might have said, "You ready?" with no rise in tone, and people might have been unsure if it was a question or a comment. Now she said, "You ready?" with the right rising intonation, and the team responded immediately with, "Yes, we are," and smiles. Carla felt her English became warmer and friendlier just by changing her tone. This story shows how crucial intonation is, especially for questions. Even if you know the right words, how you say them can change the whole meaning. When your questions sound like statements, people get confused or miss the point. But when you master the simple skill of rising intonation at the end, of yes-no questions, your English becomes clearer and your conversations more effective. I encourage you to think about your own questions. Are you using a rising tone at the end, or are your questions sounding like statements? It's a subtle skill, but one that can transform how people understand and respond to you. Just like Carla, you can practice this and see a real difference in your daily conversations. It's not just about correctness, it's about connection. When your voice invites others to answer, your English feels alive and natural. I want to share with you a technique that I find incredibly useful for mastering question intonation, and I call it echo repetition. This simple but powerful practice can help you train your ear and your voice to sound more natural when asking questions in English. The idea is to listen carefully to a question spoken by a native speaker, and then immediately repeat it, trying to imitate the exact same tone, rhythm, and melody. Don't just say the words. You need to copy the melody, the musical rise, and fall of the sentence. This will help you internalize how questions sound in real conversation and improve your own speaking skills much faster than just studying rules or lists of phrases. When I first started learning other languages, I realized that simply knowing the words wasn't enough to sound fluent. It was the way native speakers used their voice that made a big difference. So I began practicing by listening to short clips from TV shows, movies, or even podcasts, and then repeating what I heard immediately afterward. At first, I had to listen carefully and pause often to get the exact tone right, but over time it became more natural. This helped me sound less flat and robotic and more like a real speaker. Here's how you can start practicing echo repetition today. First, find a short video clip, or listen to a short question on this podcast or any other source with clear native English speakers. Listen to the question once or twice, focusing on how the speaker's voice rises or falls at the end. Notice the emotion or curiosity in their tone. Then, without overthinking the meaning of the words, repeat the question out loud, trying to match the same intonation exactly. Try to copy the pitch changes, the rhythm, and the energy in the voice. For example, if the question is, "Are you coming to the party?" Listen to how the voice rises at the end to show it's a yes/no question. When you repeat it, your voice should also rise in the same way. If the question is, "Where did you put my keys?" I notice that the intonation falls at the end, and try to copy that falling tone exactly when you say it back. Don't worry about being perfect at first. The goal is to get comfortable with how questions naturally sound in English. One of the great things about this technique is that you can use it anywhere, anytime. You don't need special equipment or lessons, just your phone or computer and access to videos, podcasts, or TV shows in English. When you watch a favorite series, pause after a question and repeat it like an echo. It's like a fun game that trains your brain and mouth at the same time. Some of my students have told me that practicing echo repetition helped them lose the fear of speaking because they started to feel the rhythm of English. Instead of thinking about grammar or vocabulary, they focused on copying the sounds and their confidence grew. It's also a helpful way to train your ear to understand native speakers better because you start to notice the subtle differences in intonation that change meaning. Another tip is to record yourself repeating the questions and then listen back. Compare your intonation to the original and see where you can improve. Sometimes you might notice your voice stays flat or doesn't rise enough at the end of a question. When you hear this, try again until your voice matches more closely. Over time, this practice will build muscle memory and make natural intonation automatic. You can also use this technique with different types of questions. Practice yes-no questions with rising intonation, like, do you like coffee? Or is it raining today? Then move on to wage questions with falling intonation, such as, what time is it? Or where are you going? Each type has its own melody, and practicing both helps you sound more fluent. If you want to take it a step further, try to imitate the emotion or attitude behind the question too. Is the speaker curious, surprised, or doubtful? Adding this layer of expression makes your speech even more natural and engaging. Remember, speaking English is not just about words or grammar. It's about communicating feelings and intentions clearly. So, why does echo repetition work so well? It trains your brain to recognize the patterns of English intonation while training your mouth and vocal cords to reproduce them. It bridges the gap between understanding and speaking. Many language learners know the right words but struggle to use the right tone. This technique directly targets that challenge. If you haven't tried echo repetition before, give it a shot today. Start with easy, clear examples from this podcast or any English content you enjoy. Repeat, listen, and repeat again. Soon you'll notice your questions sound more natural, and you'll feel more confident to speak in real conversations. And here's a little challenge for you. Next time you watch a short clip or listen to a question, pause and echo it exactly. Notice how it feels to imitate the natural rhythm of English. This simple daily practice can have a big impact on your fluency over time. Keep practicing, stay curious, and remember that every small step you take gets you closer to speaking English like a native. Your voice is your instrument, so tune it with care and joy. You've got this. Today, I want to invite you to take on a simple but very effective challenge that will help you become more aware of your question intonation and improve your spoken English in a fun and practical way. It's a small task but packed with value. I want you to record yourself asking 5 different questions, each with its own intonation pattern, and then listen back carefully to see how natural and expressive you sound. This might feel a little strange or even uncomfortable at first, but trust me, it's one of the best ways to train your ear, your voice, and your confidence all at once. Let me explain why this challenge is so important. Often, when we speak English, we focus so much on getting the words right or on grammar rules that we forget about how we sound. Intonation, the rise and fall of your voice, can completely change the meaning and feeling of a question. If your intonation is flat or wrong, people might misunderstand you or think you sound bored or even rude. But when your voice shows the right emotion and musicality, your English sounds more natural, friendly, and engaging. So here's what I want you to do. Find a quiet place where you can speak and record yourself. It doesn't need to be a fancy studio or expensive microphone. Your phone's recorder will work perfectly fine. Now think of 5 questions you use often or want to practice. Try to choose a mix of yes, no questions and wait questions, so you can practice both rising and falling intonation. For example, you might ask, are you coming to the meeting? Do you want some tea? Where are you from? What time does the train arrive? Or, can I help you with something? When you say each question, really think about how you want it to sound. Are you curious, polite, or excited? Try to make your voice rise at the end of yes-no questions to show that you're asking and not making a statement. For wait questions, remember that your voice usually falls at the end. Don't rush. Take your time to feel the melody of each question and say it as naturally as you can. Remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about practicing and becoming more aware of how you sound. Once you finish recording your 5 questions, listen back to yourself carefully. Ask yourself these important questions. Do I sound natural? Do I sound curious? Does my voice rise and fall like a native speaker's? Or do I sound flat or robotic? It might help to compare your recording with a native speaker's example, maybe from this podcast or a video you like. Notice where your intonation matches and where you could improve. This self-feedback is key because progress starts with awareness. When you become aware of how your voice sounds, you can start making small adjustments. Maybe you need to raise your pitch a little more at the end of yes/no questions, or lower it gently for which questions. Maybe you notice you sound flat because you're nervous, and that's okay. It's part of the learning process. Each time you record and listen, you get better and better. One thing I encourage you to remember is that it's normal to feel a little shy or awkward when you listen to your own voice. Most learners feel this way, but don't let that stop you. Embrace this moment as a powerful opportunity to learn and grow. Your voice is a tool you can shape with practice. Recording yourself is like holding a mirror up to your speaking habits. The more you practice, the more natural it will feel. Also, try to make this challenge a habit. Record yourself asking 5 questions once or twice a week. Over time, this will build your confidence and train your brain and mouth to work together smoothly. You'll notice that in real conversations, you start to use better intonation without even thinking about it. It will become automatic, and your English will sound more fluent and engaging. I want you to think about how this simple challenge can fit into your daily life. Maybe record your questions during a quiet morning or right before you start your work or study. Keep the recordings on your phone and listen to them during a walk or a break. Make it a fun game to notice the differences each time you practice. Little steps like this lead to big improvements over time. Remember, speaking English is not just about saying words correctly. It's about making connections with others. Intonation is a big part of that connection because it shows your feelings, your intentions, and your attitude. When your questions sound natural, people feel more comfortable and engaged talking with you. That's why this challenge is so valuable. It helps you create that connection through your voice. So, are you ready to take this challenge? Grab your phone or recorder, pick your 5 questions, and record yourself. Then listen carefully and be honest with yourself. Notice what sounds good and what you want to improve. And don't forget to celebrate your progress, no matter how small it seems. Every recording brings you closer to sounding like a confident and natural English speaker. I'm excited for you to try this because it's a simple way to make real progress. If you keep practicing regularly, you'll start hearing the difference in your own voice and in how others respond to you. Your fluency will grow and you'll feel more comfortable speaking English in any situation. Now, take a deep breath and give it a try. Your future self will thank you for this moment of effort and awareness. Keep practicing, and remember, progress always starts with awareness. Let me tell you about Takuya from Tokyo. He was preparing for an important job interview, the kind of opportunity that could really change his career. Like many of you, Takuya studied hard. He memorized the answers to the common interview questions, practiced vocabulary, and even made sure his grammar was perfect. But despite all his preparation, he wasn't getting the results he hoped for in previous interviews. He felt that something was missing. When he recorded himself answering questions, he realized his voice sounded flat, and sometimes even disinterested, even though he knew exactly what to say. That tone made him seem unsure or not fully engaged, and that could give the wrong impression to interviewers. So, Takuya decided to change his approach. He asked a friend who was a native English speaker to listen to his practice answers and give feedback specifically about his intonation and how he sounded overall. His friend explained that it's not just about the words you use, but how you say them. Especially in interviews, your tone can show confidence, enthusiasm, or hesitation, and interviewers pick up on that immediately. This was a real eye-opener for Takuya. He learned that even the most carefully chosen words might not make the impact he wanted if his voice didn't match the message. Together, they worked on recording Takuya's answers again and again, focusing on using the right intonation. For questions like, "Why do you want this job?" or "Can you tell me about yourself?" Takuya practiced rising and falling tones to sound interested, confident, and genuine. Sometimes he would exaggerate the intonation a little to really feel the difference, then gradually make it sound natural. He learned to add a little warmth and energy, showing enthusiasm without sounding over the top. That subtle change made a huge difference. When the day of the next interview arrived, Takuya was ready. He walked into the room feeling more confident because he knew he had worked not only on his answers, but on how he expressed them. During the interview, he noticed the interviewers reacting more positively, nodding, smiling, and engaging with him. His questions and answers sounded natural and clear, and he was able to build a better connection. After a few days, he received the call he had been waiting for. He got the job offer. What I love about Takuya's story is how it shows something very important. In professional situations, how you say things can be just as important as what you say. Intonation is like the secret ingredient that adds flavor and meaning to your words. It helps you stand out in a positive way and shows that you are confident and engaged. This is especially true in interviews where first impressions count and communication skills are being judged closely. Many learners focus only on vocabulary and grammar when preparing for interviews or presentations. But Takuya's experience reminds us that voice and intonation are powerful tools too. You don't have to be perfect, but you do need to sound interested and confident. Practicing your intonation by recording yourself or working with a friend can really boost your chances of success. It's about finding your natural rhythm and melody in English and using it to connect with others. So if you have an interview or any important conversation coming up, try to think about your intonation as part of your preparation. Don't just memorize answers. Listen to how you say them. Imagine you are telling a story or sharing exciting news. How would your voice change? What emotions would you express? Practicing this can make your English sound more natural and convincing. Remember that intonation is not about sounding like a perfect native speaker, but about being clear and engaging. It's about showing who you are and making a positive impression. Takuya's story is a great example of how small changes in the way we speak can open big doors. If you try this yourself, you might be surprised how much your communication improves. So, think about your own English speaking practice. Are you paying attention to your intonation? Could you try recording yourself like Takuya did? Maybe ask a friend for feedback. This little effort can really transform your speaking and help you reach your goals, whether it's a job interview, a meeting, or just everyday conversations. Intonation is the key to sounding more confident and natural, and it can make all the difference in how people hear you and respond to you. When I talk about mastering English, I often notice that many learners get stuck in the idea that fluency means using complicated words or perfect grammar. But today, I want to shift your mindset and tell you something very important. Clarity beats complexity every single time. You don't need to impress people with long, difficult sentences or fancy vocabulary. What really helps you sound fluent and natural is being clear and easy to understand. I know it's tempting to think that the more advanced your language sounds, the more fluent you are. Sometimes people feel like they have to use complicated structures just to prove they know English well. But honestly, this can backfire. When you focus too much on complexity, your speech might become slower, less confident, or harder to follow. Instead, what truly connects with listeners is when your voice sounds clear and your tone matches your meaning. The goal is to communicate your ideas in a way that feels natural, comfortable, and confident. Let's take a moment to think about this in terms of intonation, because that's the main focus of our episode. You might know a lot of vocabulary or grammar rules, but if your intonation is flat or unnatural, your questions or statements might confuse people or even give the wrong impression. So, instead of worrying about perfect grammar or trying to use complex sentences, prioritize how you say your sentences. Pay attention to the rise and fall of your voice, the emotion behind your words, and the clarity of your message. Imagine you're talking to a friend, and you ask, "Are you coming?" If you say it with a flat tone, it might sound like a statement or even rude. But if you raise your voice slightly at the end, it becomes a clear question, friendly, and engaging. This simple change is what makes your English sound natural. You don't need to add more words or change the sentence structure. The magic is in how you speak it. I want to invite you to practice this idea every time you speak English. Instead of thinking, "How can I say this in the most complicated way?" Try asking yourself, "How can I say this clearly and naturally?" Focus on using simple sentences, but with the right tone and emotion. That is the secret to being understood and sounding like a native speaker. Another important point is to connect emotionally with what you say. Language is not just a set of rules. It's a tool to express yourself and connect with others. When you speak with clarity and feeling, people respond better because they sense your intention and energy. This is much more important than using difficult words that might sound impressive but confuse your listener. For example, when you ask a question, try to imagine the feeling behind it. Are you curious? Surprised? Interested? Let that emotion come through in your voice. This will help you naturally use the right intonation without overthinking it. Your listeners will feel your genuine interest, and your English will sound more fluent. I also want to remind you that mistakes are part of learning. Don't be afraid to make simple sentences or to sound different from a native speaker. What matters most is being clear and expressive. The way you use your voice can help you do that, even if your grammar isn't perfect. In fact, I encourage you to focus on your tone and rhythm as much as your vocabulary and grammar. So, if you're practicing your English today, try this exercise. Choose a simple question or sentence and say it out loud, paying attention to your intonation. Record yourself if you can. Listen back and notice how your voice rises or falls. Does it sound natural? Are you expressing the right emotion? This small shift in mindset from complexity to clarity can transform your English communication. Remember, fluency is not about showing off complicated words. It's about making your message clear and connecting with your listeners. By focusing on clarity and intonation, you're already one step closer to sounding natural and confident. This approach will make your English easier to understand and more enjoyable to speak. Keep practicing this mindset shift every day. Notice how you feel when you prioritize clarity over complexity. You'll likely find that speaking English becomes less stressful and more fun. Plus, people will understand you better and want to keep talking with you. That's exactly what fluency is about. In the end, it's all about connection. When you speak clearly and with the right tone, you create a bridge between you and your listener. That connection is what truly makes your English fluent and natural. So don't worry about using the hardest words or the most complicated grammar. Focus on how you sound and what you feel. Your voice is your most powerful tool, and when you use it with clarity and emotion, your English will shine. Today, I want to take a moment to recap some of the most important ideas we've talked about in this episode because sometimes hearing things again helps them really stick in our minds. So, let's quickly review the key points about question intonation and how it can change the way you sound in English. First, remember there are two main patterns of intonation to focus on: rising intonation and falling intonation. Rising intonation usually happens at the end of yes/no questions like, "Are you ready?" Your voice rises to show you're asking something that expects a simple yes or no. On the other hand, falling intonation happens in wait questions, such as, "What time is it?" or "Where are you going?" Your voice falls at the end, signaling that you want information. Knowing and practicing these two patterns can already make your English sound a lot more natural and easy to understand. Next, I want to remind you how important it is to sound curious and natural when you ask questions. The goal isn't to sound robotic or flat, but to let your voice carry some emotion and energy. When you sound curious, interested, or friendly, people feel more connected to you and are more likely to engage in the conversation. This is why intonation is not just a technical skill, it's part of how you express yourself and build relationships in English. I know sometimes it feels challenging to get this right, but with a little practice, you'll notice a big difference. I also want to bring up some common mistakes we talked about, especially the tendency to use a flat tone in all questions. If your questions sound flat or monotone, people might misunderstand you or think you're uninterested or even rude. I've heard from many learners who thought their English was correct, but others reacted strangely because the intonation was off. So paying attention to the rise and fall of your voice is a simple but powerful way to improve your communication. Now I have a small challenge for you to put all this into practice right away. Today, try asking just 3 questions with the right intonation. Choose questions you would use in real life, maybe when talking to a friend or asking for information. Focus on making your voice rise at the end of yes/no questions and fall at the end of wait questions. Don't worry if it feels strange or if you have to do it slowly at first, that's normal. The important thing is to be aware of your intonation and practice it intentionally. You'll be surprised at how much more confident and natural you'll feel when you start paying attention to this. If you can, record yourself asking those questions and listen back. Notice how your voice changes and how natural it sounds. This feedback will help you improve even faster. And remember, every step you take practicing intonation brings you closer to speaking English fluently and comfortably. If this episode helped you, please share it with a friend who is also learning English. It's amazing how much support we can give each other when we learn together. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss any future episodes filled with real-life English tips just like this one. I'm here to help you every step of the way, and together, we will keep improving and growing your confidence. So go ahead and try that challenge today. Speak with curiosity, speak with clarity, and let your natural intonation shine through. I'm excited to hear how it goes for you. Keep practicing, keep believing in yourself, and I'll see you in the next episode.